Hello, everyone, and thanks to subscribers and followers of the podcast. We are with our partner, Martin Arostegui. He's a renowned and highly experienced journalist, especially in military and intelligence matters, who has covered the hint of international conflicts. We are now seeing the developing in Ukraine. He has worked for Voice of America, Wall Street Journal, the Daily Telegraph, the Washington Times, CNN, Fox News, United Press International, and France 24. And he's author of the book about the military special operation called Twilight Warriors. And I am Dr.Christian Barrientos, an international lawyer for trade, for company and business, anti-corruption and compliance. Thank you, Martin.
Hi, Christian. How are you? Glad to be on board. Good to see you as usual. We're going to start out, I think, again, getting an update on what is happening in Ukraine. I think it's important. This is one of the most important developing news stories in the world. It will, I think, set the parameters of a new world order, to put it that way, or a new world system, especially in Europe, and new borders. It will decide the new borders of NATO and Russia. And while there's a lot of news about what's going on in Ukraine, having covered wars previously, I can tell you that since developments are so fast and developing along various fronts, I mean, on the battlefield, in the humanitarian area, and you got massive human rights violations, you got massive human suffering. You get the diplomatic and the political angle. It's difficult it's easy for people who are even trying to follow this to get lost in the trees. So what I'm trying to do with these updates is trying to put it all together. I think, especially in this case, synthesize the main news, the main developments, and project where we're going from here. I think it's important that people know where this is leading. And I think events over the past week or so give us a pretty clear idea of where this is leading. Nowhere different from what we said before, but I think the lines are becoming now more the lines of an eventual solution or an eventual arrangement, or a rearrangement of Ukraine's borders, which I think is the inevitable result of this, is becoming very, very clear. It seems that Russia is managing to take the city that they've been struggling over, Sverodonetsk. And while Ukraine continues to resist there, I mean, it seems to be there's a kind of Mariupol 2. The last defenders, as well as some civilians, have taken refuge. A few hundred of the last Ukrainian defenders of the city and civilians have taken refuge in an industrial plant, which the Russians may not want to bomb for a lot of reasons. There's a chemical plant there that could release massive chemical poisoning of the area, and possibly poisoning its own troops and making any occupation of the city impossible. And also, they may want to recover these infrastructure targets intact. I mean, they want these industrial facilities to operate when they take over the region. So they will probably hold off from a direct attack on this industrial plant where these 100 Ukrainian soldiers are holding out. But they've taken the city for all effects and purposes. They are shelling a city across the river from Sverodonetsk called Lysychansk, where retreating Ukrainian forces have established a perimeter. They managed an orderly tactical retreat from Sverodonetsk and establish a perimeter in Lysychansk. But there, again, the bombardment apparently is increasingly intense, and it appears unlikely that the Ukrainians will be able to hold on to Lysychansk for much longer. And that gave them, or at least be able to launch any major initiative from Ichansk to retake Sverdlovsk. So I think the area is pretty much toast. I think the Russians are eventually going to take it and possibly be in a position to advance against the main prize in the Donbass, the city of Kramatorsk, which is the part of the industrial heartland there. So I think, again, I mean, we're talking, if they do advance there, we're talking about a siege that could last months. So I don't think there's going to be a conclusion anytime soon, especially if the Ukrainians seem committed to resist at almost any cost. But I think the fate of Donbass is pretty much written on the wall. I think the writing on the wall is quite clear. And it's unlikely that however much stepped up military assistance in the form of high-powered artillery the Ukrainians are getting from the West, from the United States and other NATO countries, it appears unlikely they can move them up, receive them, and let alone move them up to the front in sufficient quantities to turn back a Russian advance. Maybe check it for a while, perhaps, to have a stronger hand at the negotiating table. But any idea, any possibility that they could turn back the Russian advance, certainly in Luhansk, which they appear on the verge of taking completely with Sverdlovsk's final siege, with the siege of Sverdlovsk finally seeming to come to a conclusion, is very unlikely. I understand that the M777 howitzers, high-powered M777 howitzers, 100 of which at least the Ukrainians have received from the United States in recent weeks, are being deployed around Odessa to protect Odessa from a possible advance from Russian troops, which are still struggling to control the city of which are still about 130 kilometers away, still a relatively long distance. So if the Ukrainians, obviously, if they fortify their positions around Odessa with this artillery, with these high-powered artillery pieces, they're certainly in a position to hold off a Russian advance, shall we say, indefinitely. Similarly, in Kiev, some of them are also being deployed around Kiev, some of these artillery pieces, and possibly newly arriving multiple rocket launch systems, which are highly advanced rocket artillery, as good or perhaps better than anything the Russians have, although the Russians have in much larger quantities, of course, than the Ukrainians are going to get. May be deployed to protect Kiev from any possible Russian attack. This seems unlikely, but Russians are positioning forces in Belarus near Kiev, from where the last advance on the failed advance on the capital was launched at the beginning of the invasion of the Ukraine invasion back in March, and still, I mean, while it seems very unlikely that the Russians would launch another attack on Kiev, nonetheless, the fact that they have troops deployed there close to on the Belarus border means that a portion of the Russian army, of the Ukrainian army, and their artillery a good part of their artillery has to be deployed around there to counteract, as a counteract to any possible Russian advance. They obviously cannot leave that flank unprotected, that area unprotected. So how much they can reinforce Donbass in view of the fact that they have to protect there are two other main cities is highly questionable. And it seems, I think, that the surrender of Donbass to Russia is pretty much a foregone conclusion. Whether it'll be done before they take Kramatorsk or after, we don't know. If the Russian offensive take Kramatorsk, the upcoming one, which is obviously going to be launched once they secure Luhansk, Sverdlovsk, and Lysychansk, comes before the siege actually falls, or maybe during a long bloody siege in which the Russian casualties are too high, and they decide that at that point they might go for negotiations, perhaps declare a unilateral peace, unilateral ceasefire, and declare Donbass as theirs, putting Ukraine in the position of having to either reject that or conceding to Russian demands to proceed with negotiations. We'll see, but that definitely seems to be where things are going, where events are pointing to at this stage. Again, perhaps I was not clear in what I think is probably going to happen, and what the general consensus is among the foreign ministry officials in Europe and in the United States. Russia, at some point, when it feels secure enough in its position in the Donbass, is going to declare the region as theirs, as annexed to Russia, and perhaps declare a unilateral ceasefire. At that point, Ukraine will probably have to agree to those terms, will probably have to agree to negotiations based on the realities on the ground, and having to accept Russian claims. And what's going to come out of that, of any negotiation, any peace deal, if one is struck, otherwise the alternative being an interminable war, which Russia sees positioned to win in the long run, would be a divided Ukraine, much like you had a divided Germany in Europe during the Cold War, with a line running roughly between, perhaps somewhere slightly east of Kiev, down to south to Odessa, and with Russians, of course, controlling still the maritime routes into Odessa, which would be Ukraine's last main port, and therefore in a position to control Ukraine's trade, especially with the grains and other key commodities that Ukraine exports from that port. So that, is probably the happiest ending we can probably look at this stage, unless by some unexpected development, the Russian troops, which is possible. I mean, morale continues to be very low, and the troops a lot of Russians are hesitant to fight, especially at a moment when Putin is having to mobilize conscripts to go and fight in Ukraine because it's running out, because the losses among the professional units are so high. That there could be some movement within the Russian army against Putin if these prolonged sieges take too long and casualties mount up. Possibly, but I really think that an army that's in victory, no matter how much hardship it's undergoing, tends to pretty much stick behind their leaders in the end, even as bad as things may go. So, and besides, the point is that now Russia has very protective supply lines into the Donbass open from Russia, which the Ukrainians aren't in a position to attack and cut like they did when the Russians tried to advance on Kiev, and that was the reason it failed. I mean, the units around Kiev were completely isolated because of Ukrainian special forces operations and concerted guerrilla attacks, which small unit attacks, some done by mobile teams on motorcycles with, these anti-tank weapons received from the javelins and other types received from the UK to cut off the Russian supply convoys. Yeah, and then that was a rout. They have to retreat, but that is not the case in the Donbass. It's not going to be the case. The Ukrainians are not going to be able to develop that kind of capability to harass and block the Russian supply lines. So that's not going to happen.
Yes, will happen.
The Russians will be able to keep pouring men and supplies and artillery into the area, which is what they're doing. Ukraine is now currently outnumbered in artillery by 10 to 1. the Russians have 10 times more artillery deployed in the Donbas region than the Ukrainians. Okay. And that is unlikely to change substantially at any time soon. And that in itself, I think, tells the story. That in itself is testament of where this is going.
As the progress of the war continuing in Donbass, how we plan if we can, in the other podcast, we talk the plan B is continuing Donbass. That is the war now. No, is the continuing in Donbass, the region. We start the invasion and the attack. That's the point now. What do you think about the Iran's cooperation in this moment for Russia?
Actually, before we get on to that, Christian, there's another very important story here. I mean, as we know, excuse me, as we know, Russia is now in very close talks with the with African leaders have been coming to Moscow to beg Putin in highly publicized televised meetings to please open up Ukraine's grain, to please open up the maritime routes, allow Ukraine grain that is stored in Ukraine to be exported out to their countries to prevent widespread famine in parts of Africa, which are to be expected if the Ukrainian exports of wheat and grain and other grains are blocked by the Russian Navy much longer. It's curious that just as this happens, we have news that the Russian Wagner Group, which is involved in paramilitary operations in various parts of Africa, especially the Europeans, many of the French now start pulling out because they're unable to deal with the growing jihadist insurgencies or with the type of brutal military dictatorships that are being imposed by the local military to fight the jihadi insurgents, because democratic governments there can no longer cope with the degree of violence necessary to hold off the jihadis. But the Wagner Group has just recently been accused to have been involved in a massacre in Mali of an entire village which was supposedly backing the Al-Qaeda affiliated insurgent group in Mali. I mean, you're talking about, a situation, all the men of the village are rounded up and massacred and put in mass graves to eliminate, to destroy the village or any capability of it supporting or being a recruitment ground for Al-Qaeda. This isn't only, this is the way Algeria dealt with its Islamic insurgency back in the 1990s. So this is, it's something that has happened there locally. It's not by no means a Russian import. But the Wagner Group is obviously involved in extremely brutal repression in Africa. And the only country, supposedly, the military upon whom these Russian governments facing strong local insurgencies are becoming increasingly dependent upon as the West pulls out of the area. The US pulled out of Somalia and the Horn of Africa earlier. The French have now pulled out of Sahel region. The Russians appear to be filling the vacuum. So this, coupled with Russian control now, or leverage over food supplies to the area by its control of grain and wheat shipments from Ukraine, really gives Russia tremendous leverage in Africa. This is a new development, which I don't think has yet been fully appreciated or reported on or analyzed by the media. So this is another very interesting development of the past week.
Yeah, we control the mining.
The past month, anyway. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And gold.
Yeah. So obviously, Russia's going to gain increasing control of the mines and the gold, other commodities mined there, plus energy. The countries have oil. And no, obviously, Russia is going to gain tremendous political and economic clout in Africa. At a time when Europe and the United States are withdrawing from the area, so they're not encountering much resistance. But as you were saying, there are also very interesting, disturbing news from Iran. While there is increasing, it's good news and bad news, depending on how you wish to look at it. There is no question that Iran is now very close to a breakout of its nuclear capability, that soon it will be able not only to develop a nuclear bomb, it's reached, I think, the level of uranium enrichment required to build a nuclear warhead, or on the verge of it, and also of delivering a missile technology capable of delivering a nuclear warhead. It's very close to this. At the same time, however, there are intensifying demonstrations and protests all over Iran against the regime, very violent ones. It's very hard, it's impossible for any Western media to get in there. But from all accounts, they are ongoing and quite threatening to the regime. So there's a dichotomy there. Also, another development over recent weeks, which has accompanied these protests, is that the protest movement, which is clearly being aided, supported by Israel and undoubtedly by the CIA, is developing a guerrilla or armed branch who are conducting highly targeted assassinations and sabotage operations against key officials and facilities throughout the country involved both in the nuclear and missile technology research and development areas. Over the past end of May, beginning of June, it's now pretty much confirmed that two high-level officers of the Quds Force, of the Special Operations Quds Force, the B-40 unit of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, were killed in what appears to be assassinations in and or around nuclear or missile. These were, I think, missile technology facilities in which they were involved in security and heading or supervising security. In fact, there is one of the incidents. It's even alleged that the Quds Force colonel killed was actually killed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, as a suspected Israeli spy. He was executed on the spot. I mean, this is pure rumor. It's very hard to confirm all this, but we know that two Quds Force officers have been killed as a result of internal violence or internal guerrilla war, to put it mildly, to put it one way, in Iran. Also, I mean, there have been attacks. This was preceded by the killing, presumed assassination of, in one case, a very clear assassination of 4 or 5 engineers involved in missile and nuclear research. One of them was killed in an operation that really is highly sophisticated, highly precision guided drone attack on the facility where he worked, on his offices in the upper floors of a research building, in which a drone, one of these helicopter drones, launched from several miles away, exploded a bomb at the window or right outside his office, killing him. The Iranians say this explosion was made by an industrial accident, but then the Israeli media came out with very detailed description of how the attack took place, which would lend credibility to the version put out by Israel and the Iranian opposition that this engineer was killed as a result of a highly targeted guerrilla attack launched from within Iran. There have been about 4 or 5 other killings involving alleged poisonings. Another seems to have been shot. We're not sure, but this is also occurring, right, very, very close to each other. 2 of them were killed on the same day. So there obviously appears to be an increasingly violent and highly well-advised and organized and coordinated armed movement in Iran, targeting what everybody's most concerned about, what Israel is most concerned about, and the West are more concerned about, which is targeting facilities and officials involved in the nuclear and missile programs. In response to this, the United States has just launched an initiative. The Pentagon has introduced a bill in Congress to provide appropriations to coordinate missile defenses, anti-missile defenses throughout, for all its Middle East allies, for Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, UAE, Jordan, and Iraq. This is a very interesting move. It's certainly unprecedented. It's indicative to the extent that the defense systems of these former enemies of Arab countries and Israel that before couldn't recognize each other are becoming increasingly integrated to deal with the growing threat from Iran. And the bill, the appropriations bill that has been presented before Congress is called the Deterring Enemy Forces and Enabling National Defense, which was in act, as was introduced by the Pentagon. Its language specifically says that it is aimed at to protect the region, protect allies from missile attacks from Iran and groups linked to Iran. And of course, there is no doubt that Israel plans preemptive action against Iran if it does get to the breakout point, or there are clear indications that it's actually deploying a nuclear warhead on a missile, mounted on missiles, that it has the capability, it's deploying already such a weapon, that such a weapon deploys. The moment Israel has the indication that it's such a weapon is actually in service for the Iranians, it will launch some sort of preemptive strike. In fact, last week it risked a Russian response by attacking an airport in Syria, where supposedly some important military material was being unloaded, presumably by Iran, but I think also by Russia. The Russians condemned the attack by Israel, and Russian warplanes joined Syrian warplanes in a joint patrol of Syrian airspace following the Israeli attack. So there we have another, very possible confrontation area of big power confrontation in the region, possible nuclear confrontation.
Elon Musk joined aircraft and space technology support for the Department of Defense. That's very important in this moment for defense the Ukraine with the technology Elon Musk with the SpaceX and new aircraft with laser weapon. This is very interesting, no?
Yes, Elon Musk and landing technology is definitely again, this makes it almost, this technology, I don't think it can be a I don't think it can be a winner in the sense that it will enable Ukraine to take back territory it's lost, but it will certainly make any further Russian advances into Ukraine beyond beyond Donbass highly, very, very difficult, if not impossible. I know this laser technology is highly developed, the satellite technology, giving the Ukrainians possibly a technological edge in intelligence collection and processing over the Russians, and possibly even the ability to target Russian facilities using space-based systems. So, as well as reinforcing Ukraine's ability to counter Russian cyber attacks and its internet. So, it's certainly going to be highly useful, critical perhaps, in bulletproofing a future Ukrainian government governing Ukraine's main cities. I mean, bear in mind, and all Western Ukraine against any further Russian incursions.
That's the other war. The cyber security is the other war. The cyber war.
It's curious that this comes on the heels of it's indicative of when a military initiative is reaching its exhaustion point, when its leaders begin to fight among each other. I mean, there was a spat between Zelensky and President Biden last week when they accused each other of providing insufficient intelligence about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Biden saying that Zelensky didn't take his warning seriously, and Zelensky saying that Biden didn't do enough to protect them, or words to that effect. So that's obviously, if Elon Musk deploys his Starlink SpaceX system, it will make it far more difficult for any intelligence flaws to occur in the event of any further Russian moves into Ukraine. Another interesting, something has come out in the news, actually not the news. It's not there's not much about it in the news, but in the international bodies that monitor money laundering is the increased use of casinos in money laundering operations. In fact, we don't know how much money, is laundered throughout the world's casinos annually. The figure must be tremendous, because an estimated 2 billion gets laundered through Macau alone. One casino resort, which is the one near Hong Kong. In fact, it's a systematized system by which the people in China, often people associated with the government, deposit sums of money, who are trying to launder illegal bribes, or deposit sums of money with casino tour operators. In other words, people who are organizing junkets to Macau casinos in China. They pay for the junket, deposit so much money with the junket, which is then returned to them in Macau for them to gamble and wash further through their gambling activities. So this is becoming quite common. I think it's interesting because this ties in with an investigation launched in Vancouver by a local investigative journalist in Canada, James Cooper, I believe his name is, who discovered that Chinese officials were likewise being paid off in Canada with cash derived from the drug trade into Mexico of fentanyl and methamphetamines produced in China. And again, this money would be laundered into casinos. That it would, the cash would then be used. They would then use the money to play in the local casinos. And that is how they were laundering proceeds, supposedly from the Chinese-operated drug trafficking networks in Canada. So this seems to be a growing system. I mean, obviously, we've known that there's the underworld. There's been an underworld connection to the casino business a very long time, and there is no better way to launder funds than through casino gambling, which moves a massive quantity of money in very unrestricted and uncontrolled, basically what is a very totally an unrestricted trade. But the fact that they've been able to actually pin this down at casinos in Macau, Canada, and possibly other parts of Southeast Asia. They're opening now casinos in Vietnam and Cambodia, where a great deal of money is being laundered, supposedly out of China. It's becoming an international system by which to manage and launder funds from the drug trade. An interesting development. How it's going to be controlled, especially in a place like Macau or in a place like Vietnam, is very, very, very difficult to see. But this is a new feature, a new development in the drug money laundering circuit.
That's the difference. Money laundering and financing the terrorists is the two different activity illicit. Money laundering return the money for the organization, and financing terrorists is go out the money. And that the casinos is the medium for the laundering money.
Definitely. I think it's been proven. It's now been, I think, quite well established. May I end with a bit of news about what's going on in Bolivia, which I think is quite shocking. It's in Bolivia. Ex-President Evo Morales, who, as we know, he's been accused of actually being behind the large growth of cocaine production coca production out of the Chapare region, which is his home district in Bolivia, has admitted quite openly that they're going to hold a political show trial against former President Janine Áñez, accusing her of a coup and accusing her of genocide in the process of controlling disturbances that followed the fall of Evo Morales' government after it was accused by the OAS of engaging in major voter fraud during elections in 2019. And this woman is now being held in jail, which was supposed to undergo some kind of investigatorial type trial in a lesser court, is now going to be charged with genocide because some demonstrators, some protesters were killed and injured in some of the disturbances that took place, and for having organized a coup when Morales' government had to resign, and there was a vacuum at the top, and a provisional government she headed had to take over. It's incredible to me. It's very unfortunate that in Bolivia, which we thought might have been developing into a more free and open system in which human rights are being and market freedom are being more respected, is now engaging in what Morales himself says is the political show trial of the former president. It's very, I think it's quite unfortunate.
Terrible. Yeah, it's similar in Venezuela, Haiti. Bolivia is part of the Venezuela regime in the justice, in the control of the justice.
Interesting that Venezuelan President Maduro was visiting Iran this week. You know that, don't you? Or is it a planned visit? Instead of going to the Summit of the Americas, which I'm not even covering because nothing happened there. You know, nothing very important happened there except that Mexican President Manuel López Obrador didn't turn up because Maduro wasn't invited. Maduro instead had, I think, what perhaps was a more important meeting for him with the Iranian Ayatollahs possibly deciding on economic and military support, additional military, economic, and security support from Iran to Venezuela, which has been very key in Venezuela's ability to stay in power and to spread its influence throughout Latin America. Bolivia, Iran has also had a lot of dealings with the mass governments.
Yeah, you talk about Maduro. Maduro signs a 20 years cooperation agreement with Iran. For what, this cooperation, I think? What? That's the question.
That's the question. I mean, supposedly it's for industrial, joint industrial projects in energy, of course. But I think a lot of it is geared towards increased military cooperation, intelligence cooperation, and who knows, possibly the installation of missile facilities or the development of missile technology in Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Very possible. Very possible.
Similar to Russia. Russia have a Russian bases in Caracas.
Yeah. Russia has S-300 anti-aircraft systems based in Caracas, in several locations around Venezuela.
It's terrible for the region, for Latin America and America. No? It's terrible. Okay. Thank you. You heard me?
Yes, I can hear you, Christian.
You conclude?
Yeah. In conclusion, I would just say that, as I said at the beginning, these podcasts, I think, are intended to, as much as possible, bring out news that are not being too noted for the general public, and to give a broad view of world events, trends, and major trends and world events in general. We say things that a lot of people don't want to hear. We say things that don't give us any pleasure to say, I may add. But it's necessary for someone who have dedicated their lives to legal matters, international law, and investigative journalism to give what cannot be other than realistic conclusions or note the main trends that the world events are taking. And as I say, we don't dwell on conspiracies, but we don't hesitate to point them out when we think they're happening. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you. That is good for the podcast. Yeah. Thank you, Martin Arostegui. See you next podcast, and subscribe and share everything about international law, security with Martin Arostegui.